Hindi daw na-accept, Camille. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Ako po si Romel Lopez ng press1.ph at welcome po sa Truth Hour. Ang Truth Hour po ay initiative ng press1.ph to stress the fact checking is everybody's business. Ang isang taong gumagawa, nagbabasa at nagpapakalat ng disinformation at fake news ay isang taong nakatira sa kadiliman. Kaya ang Truth Hour po na initiative ng press1.ph at kasama na rin po namin ang philstar.com ay isang inisyatibo para mag-cast ng light sa dangers ng disinformation. Sabay na ni-launch po ang Truth Hour sa global celebration ng Earth Hour noong March 26, Saturday. So dahil po sa napakagandang response po ng ating mga audience sa ating inisyatibo, we decided to expand po the program and hold this live webinar. Ito po yung kauna-unahan natin at magkakaroon pa po tayo ng mga susunod pang mga Truth Hour sa mga susunod na mga araw. Antayin nyo lang po ang aming announcement na makikita ninyo sa social media pages ng Press 1 at ng philstar.com. At hindi na po natin patatagalin ang ating programa. Tatawagin ko na po ang first speaker natin sa ating Truth Hour. Siya po ang ating editor ng press1.ph at ang chair po ng Journalism Department ng University of Santo Tomas. Please welcome po Mr. Felipe Salvosa.
Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Sa unang edisyon ng Truth Hour Live, papasalamat po ako sa press1.ph, Areopagus Communications at Philstar Global, also DDB Manila for making this webinar possible. No? So we don't have a lot of time. No? So the goal of my brief presentation is to acquaint our readers on key concepts. No? So for example, I'm going to talk about truth, the concept of journalistic truth, and also what is misinformation and what is disinformation and what are the types of misinformation and disinformation. So, meron lang akong konting slides. I hope you bear with me. So, kagagaling natin sa Holy Week, sa Lenten season, yung ating discussion ng truth, I'd like to take up from this. So even during the New Testament period, the concept of truth beguiled, even Pontius Pilate. Tinanong niya yung ano ba ibig sabihin ng katotohanan, kay Jesucristo. So pero Pilate didn't get an answer, but to the readers of the Bible, malinaw yung sagot, The truth is the one in front of Pilate, right there and then. Pero hindi yun ang topic natin today, What is journalistic truth, So, journalistic truth, since we're here sa Truth Hour, discuss natin yung concept ng truth among journalists. Even sa science, kaya pinapakita ko tong solar system. Bakit ba meron akong solar system dito sa sa aking slides, no? Kasi even yung composition ng solar system is subject to consensus among scientists, no? So, nung batang maliit ako, pag tinignan mo sa encyclopedia, yung Pluto planeta no? Tapos, later on, dinemote yung Pluto, hindi na siya planeta, para lang siyang umiikot na bola na may gas at bato sa space within the solar system. Later on, they decided, dwarf planet na lang ang Pluto. No? And ngayon, I think a few years ago, another NASA scientist proposed that Pluto again be promoted to the status of a planet. So even scientific truth, no, is subject to the consensus of the scientific community. So how about journalistic truth? No, we quote what we can call a Bible in journalism school. No, the book of Bill Kovac and Tom Rosenstiel, The Elements of Journalism. Alam nyo, required reading to sa journalism school. No. And then these two thinkers in journalism, Kovac and Rosenstiel, tell us that journalism does not pursue truth in an absolute or philosophical sense. So we don't talk about the biblical truth, philosophical truth, or absolute truths, even scientific truths. No, when we talk of truth in journalism, no, we talk of a more down-to-earth kind of truth, an everyday kind of truth. No, so in short, truth is a process. No, so as I said earlier, all truths, even the laws of science, no, even the laws of science are subject to revision. No, but we operate by them in the meantime because they are necessary. No, and they work. No, therefore, journalism seeks a practical and functional form of truth. It is not truth in the absolute or philosophical or scientific sense, but rather a pursuit of the truths by which we can operate on a day-to-day basis. No? So yung mga nababasa mo sa balita, no, maaring kinabukasan magbago, no, yung complexion ng katotohanan, no, because journalism is a process, no. So we're talking of a process, no. So pag sinabi nating journalistic truth, it's a process, no. It's a professional discipline, no, of assembling and verifying facts, no. Ngayon, maaring meron kang 1,000 facts, no, pero wala sa iyo ang katotohanan if you do not convey a fair and reliable account of their meaning, no, and you have a recognition that what you have reported is subject to further investigation, no. The complexion of the truth might change when new facts, emerge, no, when new facts come to light. So we need to have a common understanding of what truth is. Okay, now punta naman tayo dun sa konsepto ng disinformation and misinformation. Ito naman, nanghiram naman ako sa mga nag-training sa amin sa larangan ng fact-checking, Rappler and Verifiles, no. Ano ba yung fake news? Ano ba yung disinformation? Ano yung misinformation? You know, journalists and especially academics are in fact shying away from the term fake news because the term fake news has been co-opted by politicians who are using it for their own agenda, for their own propaganda. So journalists and most especially academics, would like to use the term disinformation and misinformation. No? When we talk about disinformation, it's false information that is deliberately created to harm a person, a social group, an organization, or a country. No? So ibig sabihin sa disinformation, sinadya, no? And there's an intention to create harm. Pag sinabi naman nating misinformation, no? Information is false, okay? But it was not created with the intention of causing harm. So we have 7 types, no, of false information. Meron tayong satire and parody. Meron tayong false connection, misleading context, false context, imposter content, manipulated content, and fabricated content. Let's run through some of them, no? So ito ang mga fina-fact check namin ng Press One at Philstar, no? Examples, no? Satire and parody. Marami nito sa internet, no? Now there is no intention, no? There's no intention to cause harm, no? Pagdating ang purpose ng satire and parody magpatawa, no? But it has a potential to fool people. No, malalaman mo 'yan sa comment section kapag may o kaya sa mga nag-share kung ang pakiwari nila ay akala nila ay totoo, no? So, an example of this is yung Adobo Chronicles. It's a parody or satire site, no? So, ang layo nito magpatawa. Ngayon, kung nakikita ng mga fact checkers na ay teka may mga parang may mga naniniwala, no? And then that becomes a subject of fact checking. False connections, no? Maraming ganito, no? Maraming ganito, no? Headlines, visuals, or captions do not support the content, no? So yung picture, yung headline di magkatugma. Napakarami niyan sa social media, no? Ito yung isa sa mga pinoint out ng mga nag-train sa amin sa fact checking, Rappler and Verifiles. Marami ding misleading content, no? Marami ding misleading content sa social media. So, the misleading use of information, no? Ibig sabihin ito, this is the misleading use of information to frame issues or individuals in certain ways. So for example, clean-up yung mga pictures, no? Siguro may tatanggalin na portion ng image, or you are choosing quotes or statistics selectively. So marami ring mga fact-check items kami na ang judgment namin is it's misleading content. Marami ring false context, no? So totoo yung content is genuine, no? And is shared with false contextual information. Itong sikat na meme, no? Boracay during dissented time and Boracay during Bastos time, no? Pero this has not stood the test of time. No, in fact, may mga images na coming out of Boracay now, meron pa ring mga environmental problems doon. So false context. Okay, marami ring imposter content. No, marami ring imposter content. This is when genuine sources are impersonated. So as you can see here in the example, yung DOLE and DSWD, ginamit yung logo at pangalan nila, no, to mislead people about cash assistance from the government, no? This is this is a very dangerous thing kasi may tendency na maniwala when you see an official logo. Okay? And then manipulated content. Now, there is genuine information or imagery that is manipulated to deceive. No? For example, this one, no? Obviously, this is manipulated content. No? Merong rally somewhere in the United States and then may manipulate yung content ng placard. No? Maraming ganyan. No? So, ngayong election, very concerning, no, yung paglaganap ng false information sa internet, no. And one recent research tells us na isa sa mga websites that has become a breeding ground, no, for misinformation and disinformation is YouTube, no. But YouTube is a critical site, no, ika nga nila, for the formation of political knowledge because according to these scholars, no, si Soriano and Gao, no, and others have written about this. There are 54 million active Filipino users on YouTube, no, and yet, no, according to research, no, and reporting of journalists, no, this has become a breeding ground for disinformation, media manipulation, and political polarization. No, yung isang pag-aaral, no, based on 2,057 recommended YouTube channels, no, ang findings nila, no, yung malaki ang reach, no, nung kampo nung leading presidential candidate na si Bongbong Marcos, no, across audiences, no, and nakikinabang yung ilang mga kandidato sa disinformation sa internet, no. So I will stop here, no? And I hope to engage with you later on in our Q&A portion, no? Salamat po sa pakikinig sa Truth Hour.
Maraming salamat, Ipe. Maraming salamat sa iyong presentation on the different kinds of disinformation and misinformation and yung dangers ng disinformation and misinformation. Pinapalalahanan ko po muli ang ating mga sumusubaybay ngayon, no, sa Facebook at sa ating live streaming na i-like nyo po at i-follow ang mga social media accounts ng press1.ph at ng philstar.com. At mamaya po ay magkakaroon din po tayo ng Q&A portion. So, post nyo lang po ang inyong mga katanungan sa ating live streaming thread dito sa press1.ph at sa philstar.com. Babasahin po natin yan maya-maya lang. And share your experience by using the hashtag TruthHourPH. At tawagin na po natin ang ating susunod na speaker. Siya po ang National Chairman ng National Union of Journalists of the Philippines. He will be talking about fighting disinformation with facts. Ating pong i-welcome si Mr. Jonathan De Santos.
Hi, maraming salamat. Magandang gabi po sa atin lahat. No? Wala na akong slides and I just have a few notes on fact-checking at saka yung fact-checking coalitions in these elections. No? Bale, as we know, fact-checking, like fake news in itself, isn't new nor is it unique to the Philippines or to Philippine elections. No, many editors and journalism professors will say that it has always been part of the job. After all, journalism is a discipline of verification, and that is pretty much what fact-checking is. No, tas hindi rin siya. It actually predates the internet pala. Na as early as around the 1930s, Time magazine, for example, had a team of researchers and fact-checkers na yung trabaho nila basically was to verify the dates, names, and facts in the magazine's articles. No? Of course, when we talk about fact-checks today, iba na yan sa standard verification na ginagawa natin, no, ng journalists in regular coverage, yung paghahanap ng multiple witnesses and sources, disclosing as much as possible about our sources, and asking various sides for comment. No? Pero again, hindi rin siya bago. According to Lucas Graves, na senior research fellow at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism in 2017 pa to, fact-checking evolved from yung initial idea of eliminating errors in stories and protecting the reporter in the newsroom. Nung late 80s, after nung 1988 US presidential elections, where a lot of journalists felt that they hadn't done a very good job of covering yung elections na yun, mostly because they let political claims go unchallenged. Nadagdagan pa yung need for fact-checking in the early 2000s nung run-up to the invasion of Iraq. No? Kasi maaaring hindi natin naabutan yun. Pero yung coverage at the time was very gung-ho for the invasion at to eliminate the weapons of mass destruction. In the end, ay medyo faulty information. So yun, no? At that time, yung internet became an important tool for journalists and netizens who wanted to do their own fact-checking. So may yung sites like Snopes and Smoking Gun, nauso siya, tsaka factcheck.org. Naging very useful tools sila to check on urban legends, kahit political statements din, no? Kaso, unfortunately, with the rise of fake news on social media, naging tool na rin yung internet for misinformation and disinformation. No? And actually, 87% of respondents in a Reuters, in a study, said they get their news online, and 72% get their news through social media. No? So napaka-importante rin talaga for newsrooms to help with fact-checking dahil for a lot of readers, baka yun na yung pinaka entry point nila to the news, or parang yun na yung contact natin to the news, no? So in the Philippines, fact-checking began as independent initiatives by Verifiles and Rappler, although may collaborative fact-checking na rin since the 2019 elections. No? At the time, yung check.ph brought 3 universities and 11 news organizations together para mag-fact-check ng claims during that campaign. Ano? Tapos ngayon, reactivated na siya for the May elections as, again, a collaborative fact-checking project. Tapos nag-grow na siya to 21 academic, media, and civil society institutions. Kasabay niyan, Meron din yung Facts First PH, which is a coalition naman supported by Google News Initiative, no? Meron naman yung 100 partners from the media, civil society, business, research, and legal sectors. So anong point nito? What's the idea here? Basically, fact-checking, no, or verifying information, or making sure or fighting misinformation and disinformation is everyone's business. No? So it's a collaborative effort, and the idea is that fact-checking is for everyone. I think malaking development ito kasi kung kunyari, dalawa lang yung fact-checkers mo, it's easier to cast doubt on them na parang, politically motivated naman ito or siguro bayaran ito. Pero if it's, kung 10 na yung fact-checkers mo, if 20 na yung fact-checkers mo, pwedeng mas madali kang maglabas ng verified information from a newsroom that you trust. For example, kung ayaw mo ng isang newsroom, baka yung other newsroom ay meron naman. Or dahil may cross-posting din tayo, in a way, yung pag-share ng isang newsroom ng fact-checking content ng other newsrooms is parang ano na rin yun, endorsement of this fact-check. No? So how does that work? Usually, may tip lines ang bawat newsroom. So claims are sent in by readers. Meron din naman na minomonitor yung social media, no? Using tools like CrowdTangle to check kung ano yung medyo pumapatok na social media content. And then, i-check nga yun ng newsrooms, no? Tas may ratings yun per newsroom, no? And yun siya. Moving lang siguro naman sa a few myths about fact-checkers, no? Dahil as we've seen, as we work on fact-checking and on fighting disinformation, yung newsrooms naman din minsan ang nagiging victims of disinformation against them. No? For example, one very parang persistent claim is that fact-checkers are self-proclaimed and they're not accountable for their mistakes, they're not accountable to anyone, which isn't true. No? In the first place, meron tayong tinatawag na yung International Fact-Checking Network na nagtitrain ng fact-checkers at very stringent ang requirements nito. Kailangan mo ng track record for consistently producing fact checks. Meron pa silang questions on how your newsroom is financed, yung mga ganyan, and yung transparency, and check nila how independent your newsroom is. No? And hindi ganun kadali ipakita ito. No? Tapos, as a second point, dahil collaborative na yung fact checks, dahil nag-uusap-usap yung newsrooms, mas madali na rin actually ngayon na hulihin if mali yung fact check na isang newsroom. No? They can easily message their colleagues or our colleagues to say na parang mali source mo dito or parang kulang yung context mo pa rin dito. And then, yung correction nun would be implemented quickly. No? Also, another persistent myth is that fact checkers are the ones who take down yung posts and pages on Facebook, which isn't true, no? Fact checkers, ang magagawa lang natin is magre-rate ng posts, magre-rate ng social media posts, no? And ibibigay yun, kunyari sa platform, in this case, Facebook, and sila ang mag-evaluate, sila ang magre-restrict nun if needed, sila ang mag-take down if needed. And hindi naman siya arbitrary dahil pwede naman din, if you're the owner, for example, of a Facebook page or the owner of a website na flag, there is a process to appeal it. So, yes, may mga times na entries are parang incorrectly flagged, no? It could be a problem with the AI or something. Pero hindi yun kagagawan ng fact-checkers themselves. Ang trabaho lang ng fact-checker is to check the facts and to rate yung content. So yun, no? Medyo marami yata akong nasabi at pasensya na wala akong slides. But yun, I'm looking forward to discussion later. Thank you very much. That's all for me, from me for now.
Maraming salamat, Jonax. At huwag kang mag-sorry, masyadong malaman yung iyong na-share sa amin. You're able to tell our audience that fact-checking is everybody's business. At syempre, na-dispel mo rin yung myths ng fact-checking. Akala ng mga iba ang nagte-take down ng mga posts sa social media mga fact-checkers. Hindi ho, hindi namin control ang mga social media platforms. Again po, no, we are encouraging you to share the stream and also to send us your experience sa fact-checking, at kung meron din po kayong mga nakitang disinformation, to share it to us by using the hashtag TruthOurPH, and also by liking and following and messaging the social media accounts of press1.ph at ng philstar.com. At hindi na po tayo magtatagal. Punta na po tayo sa ating next speaker. Siya po ang editor ng philstar.com. She will be talking about propaganda and disinformation in the elections. Please welcome po Miss Camille Yola.
Sorry, di pala ako naka-unmute. Hi, everyone. I think I will be talking more about propaganda for my portion kasi na-cover naman na yung disinformation kanina ni Sir Ipe, and then Jonathan also talked about fact-checking. So I was actually editing my slides while they were speaking just so I wouldn't replicate anymore what they said. Okay, I'll show you some of the things I prepared and learned also. So this is propaganda and disinformation. First, we want to define, of course, what propaganda is. This is something that we now mention many times, colloquially nga even, na yan, propaganda yan, ito, propaganda yon. But, and now it has really taken on a more negative understanding. It has a more negative meaning. But before, propaganda was really something that is neutral. It's neither good or bad. If we could even recall in our history lesson that even Rizal was involved in the propaganda movement, and precisely it's called propaganda movement. So he's also with some towering figures in our history, sila Graciano Lopez Haina, ganyan. And they wanted to precisely communicate with the public what they think should be political reforms that they wanted to be implemented, which is that they wanted the Philippines to be a province of Spain and not just a colony. So hindi siya necessarily negative or positive, because you can even have a more positive aspect. For example, yung anti-racist propaganda, Martin Luther King in the US. So ngayon, what we understand as propaganda when we talk about it in the context of disinformation and you know, our digital economy and our digital ecosystem, it's this one. It's the kind of communication that makes case for a goal and bypassing reason. So it's also a method to urge you to mobilize or argue towards something while concealing from you things that you reasonably should consider. Okay, I highlighted the few lines here na we really have to take into account when we want to talk about, when we want to understand propaganda, or even for us to be able to detect it. So this is from James Stanley. He's a philosopher from Yale. So I'm taking a lot from his thesis and his studies on propaganda and fascism later. So ito yung importanteng maintindihan dito, that propaganda has a goal, and usually its method bypasses reason. And if it bypasses reason, ano yun? Dinadaan niya sa emotion, appeal to emotion. And then it highlights a certain aspect of a kind of messaging, political messaging man yan, or advertising, or whatever. It could, but deliberately kino-conceal niya, tinatago niya yung ibang aspeto para hindi yon malaman ng mga tao, or hindi yan i-consider. Itong aspeto lang na nakakapag-move na emotions, whether it's anger, resentment, maybe even feel good when something is actually tragic, ganyan. So yun yung propaganda. Now, as a journalist, I always look for some strands of an extreme ideology, extreme politics that relies on propaganda. Why am I looking at the extreme? Because by looking at this extreme that we're going to talk about, I'm able to, at least for me, or I think this is also something that's used by different journalists, we're able to already detect na some strands in messaging or communication na galing sa gobyerno or galing sa particular political parties or political actors or even big businesses, we're able to detect na at the very start, because now we have this idea of what the extremes are. So bago pa sila maging extreme, may moderate versions na yan. Pwedeng papatungo na rin dito yun. So what is this example of extreme politics na nagre-rely sa propaganda? And this is fascism. And we've heard about this before, and we're familiar with this because somehow we are aware of Adolf Hitler and what he did in Germany that triggered World War II. So fascism is the cult of the leader who promises national restoration. So makita niyo yan sa iba't ibang messaging, sa iba't ibang paniniwala around the world, and it still exists now. Even if many times these forms of government ideologies espoused by different governments, they don't call it fascism, but maybe a less extreme form of it or a moderate form of it, or hindi pa, papunta pa lang doon. So it's a cult of the leader who promises national restoration. From national restoration from what? Supposed national humiliation. And usually, meron silang mga kalaban ng mga grupo. Ano yun? Minsan, it's leftists or liberals or minorities or women. And this fascists also claim that the country's media, cultural institutions, schools, or the educational system have been taken over by these forces. So ito yung teorya, ito yung ideology that fascists want to make people believe. So highlight natin yung mga words: national restoration, national humiliation. So we want to make something, we don't want to be left out anymore. We don't want to be a developing country anymore or stuck in the third world. So a fascist leader is someone who says, I'm going to pull you out of that poverty, pull out the nation from that condition, from that poor conditions. And I will do this by removing all of these, yung mga grupong ito. So it also, yung fascist propaganda, it also relies on some mythic past. Ito importante to eh. When we are trying to detect na, yun na nga, different messaging from different groups, it relies on a mythic past. Merong form ng nostalgia. Na merong parang the person remembers something from the past that he wants to recall, that he wants to experience again. So usually the lining is, in the past we were great. Kaya nga may national restoration na ang gusto ng mga fascist thinkers or fascist propaganda. In the past we were great, so that's what they say. And so how are we great in the past? It could be that we had a great economy, the country was rich, we were being looked at by the rest of the world as a model. Or it could be that we had a great military, it was peaceful, we were progressive, like that. So, and all of those have been taken from you by insert a group or institution, kung ano man yan. Is it a political party? Is it some kind of maybe a family, or maybe an institution or a group? Yun na nga, maybe some of them the ones that I mentioned earlier. And these are the opponents and a threat to blank, an identity or tradition that you as a Filipino, you as a free person, like that, or sila yung mga nagte-threaten ng ating progress. We have to remove them. So basically, it also relies on this mythic past for a fascist thinker. It relies on a mythic past, and to do that, to return to that glorious history, quote unquote, lagi yan, it's an us versus them, that we have to stand our ground against these unseen enemies and these unseen forces. And also, ito na yung second, that fascist ideology relies on reality. So a reality that is not true, basically. So therefore, it's also against whatever expertise or science or study or institution that is against the interests of quote unquote nation building or being a strong nation, that the leader is seen as a threat. So that means if an institution makes you makes maybe a group of students, a student body, or a group of experts think critically or look at different angles, even if those angles or those sources of knowledge make the leader or a government or this messaging uncomfortable and inconvenient to that leader, that is seen as a threat. So tinatanggal yan ng fascist thinking, fascist propaganda. And we have to remember here that democracy relies on the truth. And therefore, all these things are undemocratic. Fascist propaganda is at its core, it's undemocratic because it's against the truth. And we know that if there's no truth, you're not free because you've been lied to. So this is also what we see now in, say, Russia, diba? There's a conflict ongoing and different Western nations have imposed sanctions on Russia. And we thought that actually the good outcome that the world is hoping for, even the West is hoping for, is that there would be a color revolution in Russia that would oust the current regime, the Putin regime, and restore and withdraw troops from Ukraine. Yun yung good hope, or that's the aspiration, but we know that it's hard to do, especially now because ang nangyari lang, after they impose sanctions, naging mas popular pa yung Putin regime within Russia. And we know how big and how strategic and organized the propaganda machine within Russia is. So when the West imposed sanctions, and it's the ordinary Russians who experience yung hardships because of these sanctions, naging mas popular pa yung regime kasi they see themselves as the underdog that is being stamped on by the West. So parang sila pa yung na-oppress ngayon because of those sanctions. And ayun, tumaas pa yung popularity. And ito na yan, they've been lied to. So also we see this in North Korea. Do we expect North Koreans to stop electing their dear leader? Of course not, because they don't know any truth about the dear leader because of this propaganda system that has been put in place for so many years. Okay, and this truth also entails, if we have democracy and democracy relies on the truth, then it entails that it's important to speak this truth to power, that it's okay when we are reporting things that may be humiliating to some of these officials and some of these leaders, because that's it. That those leaders have to be accountable to the sovereign people. Okay, I think this is my last slide, and just for us to consider, and this is something that the RAND Corporation, it's based on a study. That they were able to map out the kind of propaganda tactics, also based on this fascist ideology that we talked about. And this is something that is implemented, rolled out in so many countries this has been affecting so many elections as well since 2016. I think it's with the Trump elections, also Brexit, may mga threads niyan and strands na nakikita even during the Duterte administration, all throughout. So ano yung characteristics nitong fire hose of falsehoods? It's basically bombarding people with untruths, lies, falsehoods. First is its high volume and multi-channel coming from different sources, especially online. They also pinpoint some influencers who can sell those falsehoods to people. And then it's rapid, continuous, and repetitive, paulit-ulit, paulit-ulit, even if it's not based on objective reality or it's not consistent, which is number 3 or 4. Basta ulitin lang na ulitin. And when something is repeated so much, people already think that it's true. that whatever is false is true, because it's something that is affirmed by so many different sources in the echo chambers which they dwell in their own social media networks. So ito yung, I think, something that we have to be critical about. We have to open our eyes. When we see it, we have to know, oh, ito yung fire hose of falsehoods that we are experiencing. So, yun, I think this ends my presentation. If you have questions later, then we can discuss it. But yun, I'm good. This is just a teaser, I guess. If you want to learn more, then you can ask me later. I don't promise to answer because di naman ako expert really sa propaganda, but it's just something that I use in my own profession that's useful to me in detecting, yun na nga, falsehoods, and then we fact check it and verify. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. Ang ganda ng mga inputs mo, lalo na yung sa pag-present mo nung patterns ng mga propagandists, yung from the mythic past, di ba? Nakita natin yung national restoration daw, that the country is suffering a humiliation, so other forces are taking over, and then lo and behold, a savior is coming to save the country from all of this. So tama rin yung sinabi mo ron, and I will repeat it, if there is no truth, we are not free. Kasi nga ang ating desisyon is based on lies and disinformation. So, pagpapatuloy po natin ang ating discussion, again, reminder po, babasahin po namin ang inyong mga tanong, kaya keep it coming po, at don't forget to use the hashtag TruthRPH. At punta na po tayo sa last and definitely not the least nating speaker. He will be talking about asking the unsettling questions. Siya po ang batikang journalist at syempre ang kilala nating host ng podcast na Facts First, powered by press1.ph. Please welcome Mr. Christian Esguerra.
Thank you, Romel. Good evening po sa mga kasama natin dito sa Truth Hour. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you also to those who are watching this via live stream. So my topic for tonight is asking the unsettling questions. Originally, the proposed topic was asking the hard questions, pero naisip ko gawin natin siyang unsettling questions. Because basically, I realized, just like most of us here, lahat naman tayo dito journalists, in this fight against disinformation, basically those who are propagating disinformation, the purveyors of disinformation, they don't like being unsettled. They would like to get it easy, diba? For example, kaya kung napansin natin, ang dali-daling magpakalat ng peking impormasyon ngayon, napakadaling mag-engage sa disinformation kasi wala ka namang accountability, di ba? Mas madaling mag-imbento ng hindi tama kaysa iwasto yung mali. So ngayon, di ba nakikita natin, merong consortium, merong iba't ibang efforts, consolidated efforts coming from the academe, from the media to actually address disinformation. Pero pag inisip nyo, ang hirap habulin, di ba? Kunwari, eto, today lang, di ba? May fake news na naman galing sa journal, yung propaganda news organization ni Martin Romualdez, di ba? Meron silang kinalat na propaganda linking Len Robredo with Joma Season. It was denied by Joma Season, pero yung gap between the publication of that dubious article online and the correction coming from Joma Season and the spokesman of Len Robredo, that crucial gap already victimized a lot of people. So kahit ang dami nag-fact check at may magka-fact check pa, paano yung mga taong naniwala na? Especially merong confirmation bias, di ba? So yung mga taong dati nang naiisip na etong kandidato to, hindi ko to gusto ko yung isa, yung kulay pula. So maniniwala agad, di ba? Kita mo na, komunista talaga. Miski alam mo hindi totoo. So ano yung point na gusto kong sabihin dito? Kahit ang dami natin nagpa-fact check, I always say this, there has to be a lot of accountability, a lot of responsibility coming from the big tech companies to actually address the spread of disinformation. Pero on our part, kasi tayo yung information creators, tayo rin yung consumers. Lahat naman tayo yun, di ba? All at once. I think one gap that we can address as journalists and also as ordinary Filipinos, yung basta responsableng Pilipino dito sa lipunan, i-address yung sense of immediacy, yung all at onceness ng isang issue. Na pag meron agad nag-spew out ng isang maling impormasyon at alam mong napaka malisyoso nung disinformation na yon, i-correct na agad. doon pumapasok yung yung topic na inassign sa akin for tonight, yung asking the unsettling questions. So for example, tayo dito mga journalists, 'di ba? We interview people a lot. Whether the setting is a press conference, one-on-one interview, a live interview. More so pag live interview, yung mga press conference na aired live or streamed online. Ang dami-dami nagkakalat na impormasyon ngayon, 'di ba? Tapos kung napapansin nyo, yung mali impormasyon pag hindi na-correct, nagiging background ng news story. 'Di ba? I used to call it the tragedy of the background eh. Lalo pag yung mga journalists medyo irresponsible. Kunwari, yung sinabi nga yung fake information o kaya alam mong out of context. Yung ibang mga journalists kinokopya yung background, 'di ba? Kina-cut and paste sa news report nila. Tapos, nanganganak na yon hanggat magiging established fact na siya later on. Eh, ginawa mo naman talaga dati yun eh. Talaga namang ganito yung ginawa mo, di ba? So, it would help if all of us, tayo, especially journalists, would really ask the unsettling questions. Because as I mentioned, yung mga purveyors of fake information, they would never want to be unsettled. I'll cite a very concrete example. When I was still with the ANC, not too long ago, very recent to, makikita nyo to online. You can search on YouTube now. Yung interview ko kay former Ilocos Sur Governor at ngayon Vice Mayor Luis Chavit Singson. So I invited him to the program. And then my intention was to talk about his support for Bongbong Marcos, the fact that he was campaigning for Bongbong Marcos. I had no intention to actually talk about disinformation. Kaso nagkaroon ng opening because he kept on saying na yung mga bintang daw kay Bongbong Marcos, lahat yan invento. Doon ko na-realize na mas mahirap yung labanan yung disinformation pag nanggagaling siya sa mga local officials na merong clout. Hindi lang yung disinformation na nanggagaling doon sa mga paid celebrities, yung mga fake online, yung mga paid online influencers. Mabigat din pag yung disinformation nanggagaling doon sa mga politiko na merong napakalaking clout. For example, nung time na yun, doon ko na-realize na face-to-face na talagang ganun kababa yung level ng diskurso na ngayon, especially in the context of the election. Kasi when you talk about the lies favoring the Marcoses, dati ano lang siya nire-revise yung history, di ba? And then eventually, nag-descend into distortion. Iniiba. Ngayon mas malala mas sad-sad tayo because the level has reached the depths of denialism. Wala na talaga. What do I mean by this? Kanina binabanggit ko importance ng immediate fact-checking, lalo pag mga live interviews. Kasi noong time na yun, he was mentioning na wala naman doon napatunayan against sa Marcoses, wala naman doon ninakaw, etc., etc. You can search this kasi pinagtitripan dito ng mga trolls ni Bongbong especially sa TikTok. Yan ang favorite nilang platform yun TikTok. So, usually ganyan yan, di ba? So, Isgera, sinunog ni Chavit Singson, panoorin. Makikita nyo ngayon lahat. Pero tingnan niyo yung pag pinanood niyo ng buo yung diskurso, makikita niyo na magugulat ka. Parang nasa alternate reality ka. Nasa multiverse ka kung saan yung mga napatunayan at na-establish na katotohanan base sa court litigation, sa court decisions, sa Supreme Court decision ng 2003, dun sa multiverse ni Bongbong tsaka ni Chavit Singson, hindi siya nangyari. Hindi siya totoo. So even if I was fact-checking Chavit Singson right away, on the spot, makikita mo, he was not having it. And we were not talking at the level of facts. Dinideny lang niya. Diba? You can check this also. In 2003 Supreme Court decision, na isinoli yung at least $650 million Swiss bank deposit sa mga Marcoses na balik sa kaban ng gobyerno. May court record dyan, di ba? Mag-google nyo yan, di ba? You can go to the primary source if you want to. Pero bakit may mga tao hindi pa rin naniniwala? Sinasabi, hindi, dati nang mayaman niya sina Marcos, ganyan-ganyan, di ba? Bakit ko binabanggit yung Marcos propaganda ngayon? It's not because I'm anti-Marcos. It's because solely, kung matino kang journalist, kung matino kang Pilipino, hindi ka magbubulag-bulagan dun sa talagang source of disinformation na nakikita natin ngayon sa eleksyon. Di ba? Sa kampanya. Can you imagine an election whose results were driven mainly, if not solely, by disinformation? Alam natin lahat ng politiko nag-i-engage sa perception battle, 'di ba? So meron mga, but you're talking of different levels of the perception game, 'di ba? Kunwari, si Camille, si Romel, si Jonathan, si Ipe, pwedeng tumatakbo sila sa iba't ibang mga posisyon at pwedeng yung pinoproject nilang imahe nila sa publiko, hindi talaga akma o tugma dun sa pagkatao nila, di ba? For example, yung mga journalist na nagko-cover ng Senate, alam naman natin na mayroong mga senador no na ang bait-bait pag humarap sa media, pero pag nakatalikod, minumura yung staff nila, di ba? Pero pag nagpa-interview, nakangiti. Pero napaka-benign nun. Pag kinumpara mo yung twisting of facts coming from people in power just to get them elected, yun yung mas nakakatakot ngayon. Kaya maganda na meron tayong ginagawang truth hour ngayon eh. So, on the part of journalists, on the part of news producers and news consumers, ano yung pwede natin gawin? Yung immediate fact-checking. Hindi na tayo mag-iintay ng isang araw, isang oras. Pag nagbanggit, as long as we can, as long as we are able and willing, we should fact-check right away. But of course, it puts a lot of pressure on us. Kasi, nandun yung siguro iba sa atin nakakaramdam ng sense of insecurity na teka paano ko ba siya i-fact check, baka naman ako yung mali, di ba? Baka ako yung mabash. Kaya importante na pinag-aaralan natin yung issue. Kasi ngayon napaka-importanting alamin natin kung ano ba yung mga pinanggagalingan ng mga fake information ngayon, di ba? So nung December naglabas ng pag-aaral yung Vera Files. Sinasabi nila pinaka nakikinabang sa disinformation among the candidates, guess who? Tapos, I think the following February, naglabas naman ng resulta ng pag-aaral na ng check.ph. Ganun din. Very consistent. So, you don't have to be partisan. Diba? You can stay non-partisan while talking about all these things. Kasi, if you go by the facts, alam mo kung saan nanggagaling yung disinformation. So, ito yung gusto ko ibahagi sa inyo tonight. So, when you talk about asking the unsettling questions, it's very important to unsettle those purveyors of fake information or disinformation. Because again, they don't want to be unsettled. Gusto nila easy-easy lang yung buhay, di ba? Ngayon, the moment that you unsettle them, automatically may sagot sila, di ba? Instead of controverting your fact-checking with another set of facts, ang ginagawa nila, wala lang. Mas tatabunan ka ng sangkatutak na kalokohan tsaka mga fake information. That's why we have our work cut out for all of us. Medyo mahirap-hirap itong ginagawa natin. And I'm not sure we're going to win this definitely. But I'm sure the battle would be very, very, very difficult. It would take, siguro, more than a generation to actually deal with this. And kailangan mas maraming tao magising, mamulat. Diba? Para maintindihan nila na yung mga fake information na nakikita natin online, pwedeng hindi tayo apektado directly sa ngayon, di ba? Pero later on, makikita mo, tinamaan pala ako nung paniniwala ko sa fake information. Ang kulang kasi sa atin ngayon, parang we decide based on personal convenience, especially during the campaign, during the elections. We don't decide based on a sense of community, a sense of belongingness with one another, di ba? So, medyo madrama yung part na yun, pero that is very, very true. So kulang tayo sa sa responsibility doon sa kapwa-tao natin. Kasi lahat tayo, paano ba tayo makikinabang doon sa ganitong kandidato, sa ganitong politiko, di ba? So lastly, again, speaking of asking the unsettling questions, unang-una, very important for us to know the facts first. Okay? Dapat pinag-aaralan natin. If you want to fact check the clowns and the purveyors of fake news coming from the side of Bongbong Marcos, you have to study history. You have to know the decisions. You have to know the pieces of jewelry that were recovered from the Marcoses, the paintings, Vilma Bautista, things like that, the PCGG, etc., etc. Para magamit mo yung immediate fact-checking. But again, before I end, warning lang. These things come at a cost. Okay? Alam natin lahat yan. So, expect your social media feed. Expect a lot of direct messages coming from these trolls. These are automatically activated. And the trolls would be assigned specifically to attack you. And worse, you can lose your job, di ba? Kasi minsan, napapansin ko, ang kulang dito sa atin sa journalism ngayon, nakakatuwa kasi mas maraming matapang na journalist ngayon compared to siguro the situation in 2016. Okay? When I say matapang, kasi Hindi ka na magiging journalist kung duwag ka, di ba? Pero yung tapang kasi dapat ilalabas. Hindi yung sa meeting lang natin sa pulong-pulong, di ba? Sa mga discussions na ganito, di ba? Sa mga media forums, pwede matapang tayo, pero pagdating doon sa output, para bang we do puff pieces, etc., etc., di ba? Kumbaga Tony Gonzaga yung marami sa atin eh. Pero ang maganda, after more than 5 years, mas marami nang matapang. Ang problema, marami sa ating mga bosses, yun yung mga duwag. Hindi bosses na voice, our boss. Because if you talk about the media structure in the Philippines, talagang it's heavily skewed in favor of profit, di ba? Pag pinag-aralan niyo yung political economy of the mass media in the Philippines, talagang it's very hard to be a really independent journalist today. So yung pinag-uusapan natin in asking the unsettling questions, that would come at a cost. Yun lang. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. At ang dami nating natutunan sa exchange na yon. At alam ko, marami ho kayong gustong itanong. Una, yung mga nabanggit ni Christian about if we leave assumptions unchallenged, they become facts. And they become yung disinformation na pagkakamalang totoo tuloy. Kaya ang duty po ng pag-fact check ay hindi lang sa mga journalists, kundi kasama rin po tayong mga readers. At syempre na discuss din po niya yung tungkol sa issue ng accountability and responsibility ng big tech. So mahaba-haba ang mga discussion yun, no? Pero we'll now proceed po sa ating question and answer portion. So I'll invite back our resource speakers, si Ipe Salbosa, si Jonathan De Santos, Camille Diola, and Christian Esguerra to join me para dito sa ating Q&A portion. At meron na tayong mga questions na natanggap mula dito sa ating Zoom meeting room at meron din tayo natanggap dito sa ating feed sa may Facebook. So this is for everyone. Total na pag-usapan din natin yung mga issue tungkol sa about sa mga some news organizations na banggit ni Christian kanina at isang tanong dito parang may patungkol din sa NUJP kasi Jonax may tanong dito na papaano yung mga reporters na i-involve din, sila mismo nagpapakalat ng disinformation, lalo na doon sa isang press conference. I think alam natin kung anong press conference to. Paano raw ba madidisiplina yung ganong klaseng reporter para may idea din ang ating mga manonood at mga nakikinig.
Ako ba?
Sige, ikaw muna John. Tapos tanong din natin si Ipe at si Camille kasi mga bosses to sa loob ng newsroom eh. Kung mga tao nila yung nagtanong ngayon, paano nila didisiplinahin yun?
Ande yun nga. I would agree na it's an internal thing. Ayaw din naniniwala tayo na dapat ang media ay self-regulating, no? Parang tayo ang magpupuli sa sarili natin. Pero at the same time, hindi rin natin posibleng pagkukulang natin to na hindi tayo mahilig mag-call out ng colleagues. Pero pwede naman siguro internally or parang i-pull aside mo yung kasama natin na uy baka mali yung ginawa mo or ganyan ano. Siguro ang ipupush natin would be to do it well at be good examples na lang siguro dahil yung profession natin kasi minsan nagkakasuntukan tayo, nagkakamurahan tayo. So, hindi rin ganun ka-effective yung direct confrontation. But, yung ipakita natin na this might be a better way to do this might be a better approach to doing the news, baka mas effective yun.
Camille, kung reporter mo yun na nagtanong, paano mo kakausapin yun?
Actually, whenever I have an opportunity to say it, I say this one, that the editorial process is gatekeeping and verification. But that gatekeeping, sometimes we don't even realize that it's the gatekeeping from the very start, as in at the start of hiring. So dapat doon pa lang filtered na yung mga the people that you would choose to join a news organization, because once you are working for the media, it's such a heavy responsibility because you have such power, diba? That's a cliche, power, responsibility, like that. Dun pa lang, ano na yung background ng taong yon, ano yung training niya, ano yung values na ina-espouse ng taong yon, what are the principles, does he believe in this kind of journalism or that kind of journalism, and he has to be on the same page. Ang pinaka-basic niya, ethics. So, NUJP had released this booklet of ethics, pero even before that, of course, we were already following a certain set of standards. So, dun pa lang yung gatekeeping process is choosing the people who would become journalists, especially for news organizations. But yun na nga, after that, I agree with Jonathan, you really have to police your ranks. But at the same time, to respond in a way na hindi sila maka-cancel. So it could mean that you have to retrain and retool all the time. Many of our journalists, especially I guess coming from different news organizations, iba-iba yung mga ideas nila on how journalism is done. Like they're pervasive pa rin yung false balance in reporting. Dapat natatanggal na yun So ano talaga yun? It's a change in mindset and raising of standards as far as high as possible.
Ipe, ikaw kung na-confront ka ng ganong klaseng reporter at meron pa akong naririnig na baka daw itong reporter na to talagang masyado nang loyal doon sa isang politiko na yun kaya ganun yung kanyang finid na tanong. So paano mo
that reflects on the kind of newsroom that reporter belongs to.
Right.
So I fully agree with Camille. No? So when I was handling a different newsroom, I found that the hiring is not under my purview. Hiring was not under my purview. Hiring was under the purview of the owner. So there were journalists there na hindi ko gusto, pero hindi ko matanggal dahil hired directly by the owner. So what can you do about that? No? So
right.
Although I did try to do a little bit of house cleaning, but I was not entirely successful. Pero yeah, I agree. In another newsroom where I worked, matindi ang hiring process, matindi ang training process, such that hindi ka basta-basta hindi yung pwede yung pinabili ka lang ng suka tapos reporter ka na. No, doon sa newsroom na pinagtrabahuhan ko, matindi ang standards. No? Mention ko na Business World, no, na kinain na nung parent company nila Camille, no? Pero nung nagtrabaho ako doon, ang tindi ng hiring process, no? Maganda naman ang pay, and that also draws really good talent, no? Ang problema rin kasi yung ibang newsrooms walang resources, hindi magandang magbayad. So what kind of journalists are you going to attract in that kind of situation? No? Maybe Christian has more to say about this.
Singit lang ko ng konti
Actually, yung follow-up ako pero segue ko
importante kasi yan okay, I'll speak in general para medyo mabait naman tayo ngayon. I agree sa lahat ng sinabi ng mga kasama natin dito. Malaking problema ng hiring, especially yung firing. Kasi may nagkakaroon employment right, di ba? Siyempre, importante yung self-regulation. And sa akin na-realize ko, this industry is so small. It's big enough to actually cover the news, but it's small for us to know who are the incorrigible mercenaries, in short, mga tulisan. At napakarami po. Okay? So, yung industriya ng pamamahayag sa Pilipinas, napakarami pong matitino. Okay? Pero marami rin po kasing mga tulisan. And we know who these people are. So, sometimes, hindi mo siya masasolve pag sinabi mong, pre, medyo mali yata yung tanong mo. Yung ganun paalala. Kasi may mga talagang hardcore, sagad to the bones sa mga tulisan. Hindi mo na mababago yun. Okay? Merong small group na ganun, kahit anong gawin mo. And many of them are actually condoned, if not encouraged by their newsrooms. So how do you solve the problem? Hindi mo naman sila mababago, di ba? So you wait for them to retire. After they retire, they become even more propagandists, di ba? They go into PR.
Yeah.
Not na hindi nila ginagawa ngayon yun, di ba? Ginagawa naman nila ngayon to. Mag-ingat din tayo dun sa mga yung mga nagtatanim ng tanong sa mga press conference. Kasi minsan hindi galing yung tanong sa reporter Again, I'm speaking in general, okay? Lalo sa mga political coverage. I saw this when I was covering Malacanang before for the Inquirer. Alam ko may mga pinapatanong, yung mga pain. So yung nasa gobyerno kakalabitin yung reporter na hawak nila, yung nasa payroll nila. O sa press con itanong mo nga to. Ito yung itatanong mo. Para meron siyang jump off point para mailabas nung na may hawak ng mikropono yung propaganda. So mag-iingat tayo sa ganon. So, kung talagang nagkamali lang yung reporter siguro dahil bago, hindi niya alam na medyo weird yung tanong niya, yun, mapapaalalahanan yun. Makokorek yun. Pero yung mga hardcore na mga tulisan, mahirap. Mahirap
Ah,
isolve yung problema ng ganon. Ang
yung,
suggestion ko ganito, this was a proposal I had, kumbaga, an idea I had during a conversation with a veteran journalist, someone I really respect a lot. So hindi ko na siya papangalanan. Much older than I am. So pinag-uusapan namin yung problema sa industriya, bakit napakaraming magnanakaw, ang daming corrupt, ang daming nagpapagamit, even reporters nagkakalat ng disinformation. Ano ba yung pwedeng gawing solution sa ganyan? Maganda idea niya eh. And I really agree with that. Yung, especially the young ones, we build a core of young idealistic, well-meaning, easily trainable, yung wala pa masyadong sungay ng mga reporters. Of course, we're not encouraging to be God's gift or God's gifts to journalism. Hindi ganon, di ba? Pero at least yung idealism nila, you build a core of young journalists and you set a good example as a news manager and make this group of journalists propagate even more to the point na eventually yung mga tulisan, they would be pushed out in the peripheries to the point that they may become even more irrelevant kahit na they're trying to do a lot of damage. So I think that could be one of the solutions that you could add to those already mentioned by the other panelists.
Ipe, may dadagdag ka?
no, I was just saying, I forgot na kung sino yung nagsabi nito, pero in some newsrooms, no, marami pa doon holdouts from the martial law era. Alam niyo naman sa martial law era, no, na yun ang ano, doon ang nagkaroon ng maraming bayaran, no? Pero pero I can see na in some newsrooms may hope, no? Especially those run by a new breed of journalists, no? I could say Camille and John Knox belong to that new breed of journalists, no? I'd love
Ay,
to be
second demotion. Agree ako
I'd
dyan.
love to be able to work with these guys. So these guys are very innovative, they're very independent. And they try to work within the they try to make the most out of the space given to them, no? So I think there's hope naman, that mababago yung situation given the examples set by these new breed of journalists na wala na sila doon sa old mold, no, ng mga journalists na trabaho lang to, kokolekta ako ng sahod 15-30, bahala na yung reader. No? Wala na akong pakialam kung anong basahin nila, kung may mali silang mabasa diyan, no? Basta ako kumikita ako, may pamilya akong pakakainin eh. No? I think yung mindset na yon na kailangan nating iwaksi, and we should treat journalism more as a vocation, no? More as a vocation, rather than as more of a paid, salaried profession.
Right. Na pag-usapan din kanina at na-mention ni Christian yung issue ng mga media owners at mainit yung mga tanong dito, Christian, kasi nga marami kang followers, taga-subaybay sa iyong ANC program. At itatanong ko na rin ito, not necessarily dun sa may ANC program mo po, pero itatanong ko yung paano natin ibabalance yun, ang trabaho natin as journalist, kung mismong ang mga owners ang nagko-control ng editorial content ng mga reporters, lalo na kung ikaw ay isang fact-checker at hindi nagustuhan yung fact-checking na ginagawa mo.
It's really a struggle. You fight until you can, di ba? Until there's a fight left in you. Hanggat hindi ka sinisibak. Kasi ultimately, it's their company, di ba? Anong gagawin mo? It's their company, di ba?
Pero is it possible, and it is yung hope natin, kagaya na nasabi ni Ipe, yung mga new breed ng mga reporters, that we are not only editorially independent, but newsrooms will become financially independent as well?
Naisip kong solution ngayon, I don't know whether this can be considered as a solution. Yung journalism and entrepreneurship, di ba sa ibang mga schools, alam na IP yan, di ba? Abroad, may mga ganyang courses eh. Siguro yung mga naghaharing uri dito sa Pilipinas, yung mga may pera, yung may kapital, siguro mas maganda kung papasok sila sa negosyo ng media, subukan naman nilang intindihin kung ano yung pinapasok nilang negosyo. na hindi to katulad ng real estate, hindi to katulad lang ng pagbili ng bangko, pagbili ng franchise ng fast food, pagbili ah, ng negosyo ng kuryente, for example. Merong public trust involved dito, 'di ba? Hindi lang to simpleng negosyo. At siguro dapat intindihin nila yung talagang tunay na nature ng journalism. Kasi
Right.
madaling mag-pay ng lip service, 'di ba? Pag ano ka media owner, we respect journalism, etc., etc. Madaling sabihin 'yun eh. Pero how do you practice that in your newsroom? Hindi ka ba nakikialam doon sa content? Kunwari, ikaw may-ari ng ng dyaryo. Example lang 'to, hindi ko alam kung nangyayari talaga, Camila. Sasabihin mo ba si Camille, o huwag mo ilabas yan, o patangin mo yung storya, o sa front page, dapat may Belmonte. Yung ganon, di ba? So, madaling sabihin na we are all for press freedom. Pero when people are not looking, what happens behind closed doors? Kunwari, yung anchor, sinasabihin na mo, huwag kang masyado magtakal ng Marcos topics, kundi sisibakin kita. Yung mga ganon, di ba? So, ano yan eh, it demands a lot from us as individuals, as part of this whole in society. Kung media owner ka, sige, we understand negosyo inaatupag mo, di ba? Pero you respect the journalism part kasi pinasok mo yun.
Right. This one, for everyone, kung sino yung gustong sumagot, no? Kasi it's about the media ecosystem. Paano po natin lalabanan ang misinformation and disinformation kapag may cases na mismong media organizations ang nagpa-publish ng misleading or unverified info. I think related na to ron sa mga nabanggit kanina, no? At meron silang niname dito ng mga news organizations na hindi ko nababasahin. Basahin niyo na lang sa comment section kung sino 'yon. Pero I think our panelists have an idea, umingiti-ngiti sila. So, sino yung gustong unang sumagot sa tanong na to? Kung paano lalabanan ang disinformation kung mismong mga news organizations pa ang nagpapakalat nito?
Ako quick lang. Yung errors are very normal sa isang newsroom kasi tao lang naman yung mga editors and reporters na nagkakamali. No? So, ngayon kung sadyang nagpa-publish ng propaganda or disinformation, well, ibang usapan na 'yon. No? Ang nakita natin sa election cycle na 'to, merong gumagawa nun.
Right.
Pero doon naman sa mga nag-publish inadvertently ng maling impormasyon, magandang makita, meron ba tong internal process to correct? No? And then are they transparent with this? No, do they update their stories? No? Do they admit to inaccuracy or at least and apologize for it? No? Meron bang ganung process? Malalaman mo kung sino yung matinong newsroom at hindi matinong newsroom based on that.
At sa isang tanong dito na mention pa yung about sa mga kaso ng kuryente na may mga hacking daw, so unverified, tapos na ipalabas kagad. So mabuti na highlight din ni Ipe yung sinabi niya na verification tsaka kung ano yung process ng rectifying yung errors. Kasi nabanggit mo rin yun, Jonas, kanina sa talk mo yung policy ng IFCN, di ba? Kasi sa International Fact-Checking Network, kasama yan doon sa mga requirements na dapat meron tayong clear policy, mga fact-checkers. Kung sakaling nagkamali tayo, paano ba natin yun i-correct?
Oo, tama. Siguro, hindi, mandagdag lang, paano natin babanggain yung mga ganon na naglalabas ng fake, ng maling information, no? Ayun, di fact-check din. Not necessarily labeled as fact-check, but i-interrogate natin yung source nila. Tingnan natin, ano ba tong claim na to? Like, 500,000 ba talaga pumunta sa rally na to? Posible ba yun? Mga ganung
Right, tama. Second to the last question na natin, no? Kasi lumampas na tayo ng 1 hour dito, pero meron tayo isang tanong from London. For everyone, sino yung gustong sumagot na to, na naka-encounter na ba kayo ng ganitong fake news, yung proliferation ng fake news na kumalat or disinformation nung time ng mga nakaraang administrasyon? Sinong gustong sumagot niyan?
Ako short lang. Sige. Short
Kahit
lang.
naman Christian, okay lang.
Masyado ng epal eh. Short
Ikaw
lang.
naman ang veterano dito eh.
Bata pa ako. Okay. Ibang level ng disinformation ngayon eh. Ewan ko, kumpara. Ang mga na-cover kong time, yung si Gloria, si Noynoy, and then, reporter pa rin naman tayo nung panahon ni Duterte. Pero, iba yung level of disinformation yan. Mas nakakagulat. Tsaka dati mas may takot yung mga public officials eh. Dati medyo swabe yung pagpapakalat nila ng fake news.
Hmm.
Diba? Idadaan sa sa reporter o maglilik ng ganitong storya, papatalunin yung media, di ba?
Hmm.
Ngayon hindi eh. Nawala yung smooth operation eh. Wala kaming pakialam basta ito yung katotohanan according to us. Kaya mas nakakatakot.
Okay, bali last question na natin to. So ibabato ko to sa lahat and I would like you to answer it kung sino na ang gustong mauna. So anong gusto nyong maipayo sa ating mga nanonood at nakikinig kung ano mga dapat nilang gawin para ang kanilang desisyon sa darating na eleksyon ay hindi na-impluwensyahan ng kasinungalingan at disinformation?
Ako na lang muna. Siguro go to the reliable sources of news, no. I think isa sa mga nakakalimutan na ng mga tao ngayon yung paano maghanap ng balita. Kasi we scroll on our feed, no. We scroll down our feed so many hours a day. And we don't have time to pick up a newspaper or go to a website. Pero using our smartphones, we should bookmark, no? We should like or subscribe to reliable sources of news, no? Yung mga nababanggit na mga news organizations diyan, hopefully later on mawi-weed out yan sa market or bababa yung standing niya sa market once people find out what kind of news organizations they are, what kind of newsrooms they are, no? How they operate, no? Hopefully ma-realize ng tao na hindi pala verified o hindi vetted yung mga storyang lumalabas dito sa news website na to, no? And yun nga, ang advice ko is we have to know kung saan maghahanap ng tamang balita, no? Yung mga reliable sources of news kagaya ng philstar.com for instance, no? So sama na rin natin yung press1.ph. No, makinig doon sa podcast ni Ian, no? Hanapin natin yung mga independent newsrooms, hindi yung mga newsrooms na nakadikit doon sa mga malalaking business interests o hindi kaya doon sa mga malalaking mga political interests, no? Malalaman nyo yan sa story selection nila, sa mga anggulo nila, sa mga narratives na piniplay up nila, no? Na merong nakulang o kaya walang independence itong mga newsrooms na to, no? Tigil na ako.
Salamat, Ipe. Sinong next? Jonax?
Siguro ano na lang, hindi, nasabi naman ni Sir Ipe, no? Pero siguro pwede rin natin tingnan yung mga kandidato, no? Or basically tingnan natin kung ano yung attitude nila, ano yung pakikitungo nila sa media, no? Parang beyond the elections na kasi ito, na kung paano sila ngayon, most likely ay ganun sila after, no? At kung hindi sila handang kumarap sa atin, or kung medyo hindi totoo yung sinasabi nila, siguro dapat red flag yun para sa atin, warning yun para sa atin, dahil sign yun kung paano pakikitungo natin sa kanila in the next 6 years. Ayan, maraming salamat.
Right. Christian, Camille?
Ako na, para huli si Camille.
Okay.
Agree ako sa lahat ng sinabi. Jonathan, tsaka na Ipe, comprehensive eh. Nagdag ko lang siguro, to paraphrase, I think it was Trillanes who said this eh. Yung sabi niya, just to paraphrase it, how a candidate campaigns will determine how he will govern if he wins. So kung yung kandidato nyo, walang ginawa, kundi magpakalat ng fake news, tapos i-distansya yung sarili niya rin sa disinformation, na parang wala siyang kinalaman, kahit siya yung nasa likod, mag-ingat-ingat kayo sa ganun. Hindi ko sinasabing siya lang gumagawa ng ganun. Ang totoo, ang kalakaran, most if not all candidates, meron kanya-kanyang troll farms yung mga line troll networks. Let's not be naive. Lahat meron. Miski yung mga tinatawag nating good guys, meron yan. Pero ang pinag-uusapan lang, what kind of damage these people are doing compared to the catastrophe coming from the main source of disinformation.
Right. Thank you, Christian. Camille?
Okay. Marami na sila nasabi at I agree, it's comprehensive. I think yung gusto ko na lang idagdag din, for me, this is my criteria. It's important to have your own criteria for a candidate, but there's just one maybe outstanding value or principle that I'm going to vote for. For example, at choosing my own candidates. And for me, it's press freedom. So sino yung kandidato na alam natin na makakapag taguyod ng press freedom for the next 6 years. Kasi yung press freedom, we think it's just for the press, it's for the news media, but no, it's for everyone. When kapag nagkaroon ng suppression or pressure ang mga newsroom under a certain administration because pinipressure yung businesses nila, yung ownership, yung management, yung journalists, ina-attack, piniprevent mag-cover, etc., magkakaroon ng problema. Kasi ang pinaka-basis ng mga decision making natin, even this democratic process of checks and balances and even yung exchange of arguments for us to form informed decisions and policies, ay yung pinaka-basic, accurate facts. At yung facts na yun will be inconvenient to many those who are in power. So kapag nawala yung basis na yon at yun yung trabaho ng ng media, saan pa tayo magre-rely? So yun, defend the media and you will defend democracy and you will also defend our future. Yun lang.
Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to thank our speakers for our first Truth Hour Live. Again, let's thank Felipe Salbosa, Jonathan De Santos, Camille Jola, and Christian Esguera. At maraming salamat din po sa inyong lahat sa pagsama sa amin dito sa live stream ng Truth Hour. Aking reminder po na abangan nyo po ang aming mga announcement, kaya pakipollow po ang press1.ph at philstar.com sa aming mga social media accounts kasi meron pa po itong susunod na Truth Hour Live before the May 9 election. I-announce po namin soon kung anong araw po yan at anong oras. And I encourage you to join us in our continuing war against disinformation. You could use the hashtag TruthRPH, and you could also find mga fact-check stories sa check.ph and also use the hashtag FactsFirstPH para sa mga fact-checking coalition dito sa Pilipinas na lumalaban sa disinformation. Magkita-kita po tayo muli sa susunod na Truth Hour Live. Ako po muli si Romel Lopez ng press1.ph. Paalala po, mag-ingat po sa mga kasinungalingan.